emperor saw an engraving in Novarez's room which displeased him. It was the inauguration of Waterloo Bridge in London. It was a handsome colored engraving, but the subject, or rather the name, Waterloo, brought a frown to his face. He rebuked Novarez for having such an engraving in his room. When the emperor had finished his visit, he wanted to go down again, but our staircase was only a ladder, very straight up and down, so that he had to have the help of someone's arm in order to get down. He said, "What a vile staircase! A ship's ladder is not so dangerous. One is likely to break his neck here." As a matter of fact, the staircase was so bad that several of us had more than once gone down on our heels or had struck our heads against a piece of wood which ran across the opening and which one did not always take care to avoid. It was toward the middle of the year 1820 that the emperor put a number of his manuscripts in order and had them copied, among them being that of the campaign of Egypt. He had worked pretty regularly on this campaign during the 2 preceding years. After first dictation made partly to the Grand Marshal and partly to the General Gorgon, Marchand had made a clean copy of it, but this had become in time so full of corrections, changes, and transpositions that the emperor gave it to me to do over. My work was finished except 1 or 2 chapters concerning the administration of Egypt. When the first symptoms of his illness appeared, he had not time to review this chapter or chapters, which were entirely in the writing of the Grand Marshal. I wish to point out that all the Longwood manuscripts are in my hand, except a few of little importance, or which were from a first dictation. The Longwood Gardens. If the different occupations of his study distracted the emperor's mind, his body did not take enough exercise. The short turns which he took in the long walk in the enclosure were not enough to keep up his strength. He had refrained for a long time from an excursion beyond the grounds of Longwood in order not to give the governor a chance to subject him to new vexations. He thought that gardening was what best suited his state of seclusion, to compensate a little for his lack of outside exercise. From that time, nothing but gardens was talked of. The building in which he lived was surrounded by them. It was the models of fortifications which gave him the idea. And then he wished to have fruits and vegetables under his hand. He wanted to have some shady alleys. He wanted to hide the sentinels from his windows. On the side of the camp, the North Longwood house had a building in front with 2 wings behind, and up to the line of the facade there were 2 squares of turf. The windows of the study and the bedroom on one side, and those of the reception room and salon on the other, opened on the western square. The glass door of the dining room, the windows of the library, and those of the reception room and salon opened on the square on the east side. These squares were each about 30 feet by 40. The long side was that next to the salon and reception room. In the center of the first square, that on the west, they drew a lozenge. A little path 2 feet wide ran around it, and another 3 feet wide ran around the triangles, leaving a flower bed between. The beds were filled with a great quantity of rose trees. There were strawberry plants in front of them, with grass for a border. The interior of the lozenge was turfed, and in the center the emperor had planted a coffee tree, which had been presented to him. He called this little garden his parterre. The other garden, laid out in the center of the square on the east side, became so thick that while the leaves lasted, the sunlight hardly penetrated it at all. The emperor called it his grove, or the Garden of Ali. The other was Marchand's garden. When all the planting was finished, the emperor had fences made to enclose his little gardens, at the foot of which climbing plants called the passion flower were put. In less than 3 months, the fences became thick hedges. This plant makes an extraordinary growth in the island. It will throw out shoots 1/2 foot long in 24 hours. The leaf is deep green, and the stalk is furnished with corkscrew growths. The flower, which is composed of different colors, is large and somewhat resembles the plaque of a large decoration. As 3 or 4 months had passed without the emperor's carrying out the plan which he had conceived, it was thought that he intended to limit himself to the 2 little gardens, but this was a mistake. He caused the work to be taken up again when we least expected it. In the first place, he complained that the southeast wind annoyed him when he was in his grove. The governor had a semicircular turf wall built 8 or 9 feet high, according to a wish expressed to him by Mr. de Montsalon 6 months before his death. The emperor had a mound of turf built at the end of it 5 or 6 feet high, with a platform 6 feet square, and on it he built a summer house of light framework, the walls and roof of which were of sailcloth. It was lighted by diamond-shaped glass windows. This summer house was intended to serve the emperor as an observatory in which he could sit comfortably and see the arrival of ships at Jamestown. When it was finished and the soldiers had gone away, the emperor ordered Monsieur de Montsalon to make him a plan of a garden to fill all the space between the wall which they had just built and the gardener's cabin. When the ground had been enclosed, they leveled it off in several places and marked out all that had been designed in the plan. The emperor had a basin dug near the turf wall, leaving a walk between them. Masons belonging to the engineers were brought, and the basin was lined with stone, which was plastered with cement on the inside, and this cement was covered with several layers of oil paint. It was thought that by this arrangement it could hold water. They set in a little pipe which brought water from the reservoir of the house to the basin. When the work was finished and the workmen had gone, the emperor, eager to enjoy it, had the water turned on, and when the basin was full, caused 100 little red fish to be thrown into it, which he had brought from the town. The next day the basin was half empty, and the bodies of some fish were lying on their sides on the surface of the water. Probably these fish had been poisoned by the paint, which was not yet entirely dry. The basin was filled again. The next day was as it had been the day before, and it went on this way for a number of days. Every day some of the fish were dead. The emperor, seeing that his basin could not hold water, decided to have it lined with lead. The fish which had survived were taken out and put in a hogshead, waiting till the new work was finished. The plumber was sent for at once and immediately went to work. In a few days the basin was in a condition to hold water, and the fish were thrown in again. They played about more comfortably than in the hogshead in which they had been, in spite of all the care, the precautions which were taken to keep these fish alive. 4 or 5 months later, not one of them was left alive.